The millionaire's twins had driven away every nanny until an unexpected housekeeper from Australia did something no one saw coming. What began as a simple act of kindness quickly unraveled a story filled with secrets, transformation, and second chances. What she brought into that mansion wasn't just peace, it was the kind of healing money could never buy. Get ready, because this story will move your heart in ways you didn't expect. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Like this video if you believe in the power of compassion, and don't forget to subscribe to follow more stories of hope and redemption. The Kingsley estate sat perched on a hillside overlooking Sydney Harbour, its modern glass and stone architecture gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Inside, the pristine white marble floors reflected the chaos that had descended upon the household in recent months. 5-year-old twins, Oliver and Oscar Kingsley, were currently engaged in what their father, James Kingsley, privately referred to as Hurricane Hour. "I won't eat it, it's green and it's disgusting," Oliver shouted, pushing away the plate of steamed vegetables that his now former nanny, Ms. Winters, had prepared. Oscar, not to be outdone by his brother, had climbed onto the kitchen counter and was threatening to pour his juice onto the expensive Italian rug. Ms. Winters, a stern woman with 30 years of childcare experience and impeccable references, had reached her breaking point. "Mr. Kingsley," she said, her voice trembling with barely contained frustration, "I have worked with difficult children before, but this is beyond my capabilities." James Kingsley stood in the doorway of his kitchen, his tailored navy suit still crisp despite the 14-hour workday he had just completed. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, and his usually clean-shaven face showed the shadow of a 3-day beard. At 42, the tech entrepreneur and widower looked a decade older than he had just 8 months ago. "Ms. Winters, please, we can discuss a raise, additional support, whatever you need." The desperation in his voice was palpable. He couldn't lose another nanny. Not again. Not when he had meetings scheduled all week with international investors who could make or break Kingsley Innovations' new sustainable energy project. Ms. Winters shook her head firmly. "Mr. Kingsley, this is my 5th emergency call this week. I've tried everything in my professional repertoire. The boys need more than I can provide." She gathered her belongings with dignified efficiency. "I'll stay until you find a replacement, but I must give my notice effective immediately." James ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "I understand," he said quietly, though he didn't understand at all. How had his bright, loving boys transformed into these unmanageable whirlwinds since Claire's passing? The child psychologist had mentioned grief manifesting as behavioral issues, but nothing had prepared him for this relentless storm. After Ms. Winters retreated to the guest house, James called his assistant. "Emma, we need another nanny, immediately." He glanced at the twins, who had now quieted and were huddled together near the window, whispering secrets to each other as they often did. "Someone different. The conventional approach isn't working." "Mr. Kingsley, we've tried every elite agency in Sydney," Emma replied, her voice tinged with concern. "Perhaps we should consider a more unconventional solution. At this point, I'd hire Mary Poppins if she floated down with her umbrella," James said, attempting humor despite his exhaustion. "There is someone," Emma said cautiously. "Not from any agency. My cousin manages a community centre in Melbourne. There's a woman there, Lucy Lawson. She works with troubled children, has a background in child psychology, though not formally. She's unorthodox, but Emma says she connects with kids in a way that's almost magical." James frowned. "Unorthodox how?" "She doesn't have the traditional credentials or experience with high-profile families. She's been working at a community centre, mostly with kids from difficult backgrounds. But my cousin says she has this gift. Kids respond to her, open up to her." James watched as Oliver carefully helped Oscar down from the counter, their momentary alliance in mischief, shifting to one of care. These fleeting glimpses of their true selves, kind, thoughtful boys, were becoming increasingly rare. "Send me her information," James said finally. "And Emma? I need her here by tomorrow evening, whatever it costs." The following evening, James stood in his foyer awaiting the arrival of Lucy Lawson. The house was unusually quiet. The twins were in their playroom with Ms. Winters supervising her final evening. James checked his watch again. She was 15 minutes late. When the doorbell finally rang, James opened it himself, an unusual occurrence in a house typically staffed with personnel. The woman standing on his doorstep was nothing like he had imagined. Lucy Lawson was in her early 30s with wild copper curls barely contained in a messy bun. She wore faded jeans, a simple blue t-shirt and well-worn boots. A small duffel bag was slung over her shoulder, and she carried what appeared to be a wooden box under her arm. Her most striking feature was her eyes, bright green and alert, taking in everything at once. "G'day," she said with a warm smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "You must be Mr. Kingsley. Sorry I'm late. Traffic from the airport was a nightmare." James found himself momentarily speechless. This casual, unpolished woman was supposed to succeed where a string of elite, highly trained professionals had failed. "Ms. Lawson," he finally managed, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Lucy, please," she corrected, her handshake firm and confident. "And no worries, I love a challenge." As James led her inside, explaining the situation in carefully measured terms, he couldn't help but notice how she absorbed every detail of the house, not with the awe or intimidation he was accustomed to seeing, but with curious assessment. "The boys have been through a lot," James said, his voice softening. "Their mother passed away 8 months ago. Sudden illness. They were very close to her." Lucy nodded, her eyes full of understanding rather than pity. "And you? How are you doing with all this, Mr. Kingsley?" The question caught him off guard. None of the previous nannies had ever asked about his well-being. "I'm managing," he said stiffly. "Right," Lucy said, not pushing further. "Well, I'd like to meet the little hurricanes if that's all right." James led her to the playroom, where the scene that greeted them was all too familiar. Toys scattered everywhere, Miss Winters looking harried, and the twins engaged in what appeared to be a competition to see who could shout the loudest. "Boys," James called over the noise, "this is Miss Lawson. She's going to be staying with us for a while." The twins paused their chaos to stare at the newcomer with undisguised skepticism. Oliver, always. The more vocal of the two stepped forward. "Another one, she won't last either." James opened his mouth to reprimand his son, but Lucy crouched down to Oliver's level before he could speak. "You might be right about that, mate," she said with a conspiratorial smile. "But I reckon we could have some fun before I go, yeah?" Oscar, typically the quieter twin, moved closer to his brother. "What's in the box?" he asked, pointing to the wooden container Lucy still carried. Lucy's eyes lit up. "Ah, this? This is my treasure box. Only very special people get to see what's inside." "We're special," Oliver declared, though uncertainty had replaced some of his defiance. "I thought you might be," Lucy replied, "but there are rules about the treasure box. Important ones." Both boys leaned forward. Slightly, their curiosity piqued despite themselves. "First rule," Lucy continued, "is that we have to make a proper introduction. Second, we need a quiet, clean space to open it. And third, what's inside stays between us. It's a secret club, just us three." James watched in astonishment as the twins exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them before they began hurriedly picking. "Sup, toys?" "I'm Oliver," said the slightly taller twin, extending his hand with a formality that mimicked his father's business demeanor. "I'm 5 3/4. "And I'm Oscar," said his brother, his voice softer, but no less determined. "I'm 5 3/4 too, we're identical." Lucy shook each small hand with appropriate seriousness. "Pleasure to meet you both. I'm Lucy. I'm 32.5, and I'm from Melbourne." As the boys continued cleaning with unprecedented enthusiasm, Ms. Winters sidled up to James, her expression a mixture of surprise and residual frustration. "They haven't picked up voluntarily in months," she whispered. James nodded, watching as Lucy chatted casually with his sons, making no move to help them clean, but offering encouraging words. There was something in her approach, a blend of respect and playfulness, that seemed to speak directly to the boys in a language they understood. For the first time in months, a fragile hope began to take root in James's chest. Perhaps, just perhaps, Emma's unconventional suggestion might work where everything else had failed. Lucy settled into the Kingsley household with the easy adaptability of someone accustomed to navigating unfamiliar territories. Her room in the east wing of the mansion was larger than her entire apartment in Melbourne, but she made it her own by arranging a few cherished possessions on the dresser: a small jar of red earth from the outback, a handmade dream catcher from one of her former charges, and a worn paperback of Aboriginal folk tales. The mansion itself was a monument to modern luxury and careful design, all clean lines, neutral tones, and dramatic views. But Lucy quickly noted the absence of warmth. There were no family photos on display, no children's artwork proudly exhibited, no visible traces of the woman who had once been the heart of this home. It was as though Claire Kingsley had been carefully erased, leaving only a pristine, emotionally sterile environment behind. On her first morning, Lucy woke before dawn, a habit from years of early shifts. She padded quietly to the kitchen, surprised to find James already there, dressed in running gear and nursing a cup of black coffee. "You're up early," he commented, his tone neutral but his eyes assessing. "Force of habit," Lucy replied, helping herself to a mug. "Mind if I join you?" "The coffee." "Help yourself." "The run, actually," Lucy clarified with a small smile. "I try to get a few kilometers in each morning. Clears my head." James raised an eyebrow. "It's 6 kilometers around the headland, quite steep in parts." "Sounds perfect," Lucy said, taking a sip of her coffee. "I'll be ready in 5. 20 minutes later, they jogged side by side along the coastal path. Sydney's early. Morning light cast a golden glow across the harbour, the opera house gleaming in the distance. Lucy matched James's pace easily, her breathing steady as they tackled the inclines. "So," James said between breaths, "what made you accept this job?" "It was quite sudden." Lucy considered her answer carefully. "The boys," she said simply. From what Emma described, they sounded like they needed something different. "And you think you're that something?" "I don't know yet," Lucy admitted. "But I've worked with enough kids to know that behavior is communication. Your boys are trying to tell you something." James's jaw tightened. "The psychologist said it's grief." "Maybe," Lucy nodded. "But grief isn't just sadness. It's confusion, anger, fear. It's feeling like your world's been turned upside down, and not knowing how to right it." They ran in silence for a moment before James spoke again. "You said you're not formally trained. How did you end up working with children?" Lucy's pace faltered briefly. "My own childhood was complicated. Foster homes mostly. Some good, some not so much. I know what it feels like to be a kid whose world doesn't make sense anymore." She quickened her stride. Again. "Later, I found people who helped me make sense of it all. I wanted to do the same for others." By the time they returned to the house, the twins were awake and creating their usual morning chaos. Ms. Winters, who had stayed overnight to help with the transition, looked relieved to see Lucy. "They refused to get dressed," she explained, frustration evident in her voice. "And they've hidden one of each pair of shoes." Lucy nodded thoughtfully. "Thanks, Ms. Winters. I've got it from here." The older woman hesitated. "Are you certain? I could—" "We'll be fine," Lucy assured her with a smile. "Thank you for everything." After Ms. Winters departed and James retreated to his home office for an early conference call, Lucy turned to the twins, who were watching her with defiant expectation. "Right, you two," she said cheerfully. "I hear we're having a shoe emergency." "We don't want to go to school," Oliver declared, crossing his arms. "The other kids are mean," Oscar added quietly. Lucy sat cross-legged on the floor, bringing herself to their level. "That's rough," she said. "School can be a real pain sometimes." The twins exchanged surprised glances, clearly having expected a lecture or demands. "You know," Lucy continued casually, "I've got a bit of a problem myself. Your dad's invited some very important people for dinner tonight, and I promised I'd help make it special. But I don't know what foods you like or what games you enjoy or anything about what makes a good party in this house." "Dad doesn't do parties," Oliver said skeptically. "This is a grown-up party," Lucy clarified, "for his work. But I thought maybe we could make it less boring." Interest flickered in the boy's eyes. "How?" Oscar asked. "Well, that's where I need your help. But we'd have to plan it after school, and for that, we need shoes." Lucy reached into her pocket and pulled out a small metal compass. "This was given to me by an old Aboriginal elder. He said it helps find things that are lost." The twins leaned forward, intrigued. "Would you like to try it?" Lucy asked, holding out the compass. For the next 20 minutes, Lucy guided the boys on a treasure hunt around the house, using the compass as a playful prop while they searched for the hidden shoes. By the time all footwear was recovered, the twins were dressed and bubbling with ideas for the evening's mission. "We'll be secret helpers," Lucy told them as she straightened Oliver's collar. "But first we need to gather intelligence at school." "What's intelligence?" Oscar asked. Information, Lucy explained. Like what foods grown-ups at boring parties usually like, or what games might make them laugh. You could ask your teachers or observe the adults at school. Like spies. Oliver's eyes widened with excitement. Exactly like spies, Lucy confirmed. And spies are very good at blending in and following rules, so no one suspects them. When the boys' driver arrived to take them to school, they departed with minimal fuss, their minds occupied with their new mission. James, emerging from his office between calls, watched the smooth departure with undisguised amazement. How did you manage that? He asked Lucy. Redirection, she replied. And a bit of playful conspiracy. They're smart kids, James. They just need to feel like they have some control in a world that probably feels very out of control to them right now. James studied her for a moment. The dinner tonight is important. The Blackwell Group could be significant investors in our renewable energy project. We'll be ready, Lucy assured him. The boys are on board as our special agents for the evening. James looked skeptical but nodded. Whatever works, I suppose. Throughout the day, Lucy prepared for both the dinner and the twins' return. She discovered a storage room containing boxes labeled Claire's Things, and after a moment's hesitation, opened one. Inside were family photo albums, handcrafted, items and children's artwork, memories carefully packed away rather than displayed. One photo caught her attention. Claire, a beautiful woman with the twins' same soulful eyes, laughing as she painted with the boys, their small hands covered in colorful splatters. Lucy carefully returned the photo, but made a mental note of what she'd seen. When the twins returned from school, they burst through the door with unprecedented enthusiasm. We got intelligence, Oliver announced proudly. Mrs. Patterson says grown-ups like tiny food on sticks, Oscar added, and Mr. Davis says they like to talk about boring things like weather and traffic. Lucy grinned. Excellent work, agents. Now how about we prepare our headquarters for the mission? For the next 2 hours, Lucy involved the boys in age-appropriate dinner preparations, arranging flowers, which involved counting and color recognition, setting the table, practicing left and right, and preparing simple appetizers, following step-by-step instructions. She framed each task as part of their mission, complete with secret agent terminology that had the twins giggling and engaged. By the time James emerged from his office, the dining room had been transformed. The formal space now featured tasteful decorations, meticulously arranged place settings, and small handwritten cards at each seat. The boys did this, he asked incredulously. With a little guidance, Lucy confirmed. They're quite capable when they're invested in the outcome. As the evening progressed, the twins, dressed in their special agent outfits, simply their nice clothes with the addition of tiny clip-on bow ties Lucy had improvised, helped serve appetizers and charmed the investors with their unexpected poise. When they finally went to bed, exhausted but proud, the Blackwell representatives were already discussing preliminary terms with James. Your children are delightful, James, commented Victoria Blackwell, the firm's senior partner. I had no idea you were balancing single parenthood with running Kingsley Innovations. That's incredibly admirable. Later, after the guests had departed and the house had quieted, James found Lucy in the kitchen, preparing lunches for the following day. That was... He began, searching for the right words. Unexpected, thank you. Lucy smiled. The boys did the hard part. They just needed the right motivation. And what was that? Making their dad proud, Lucy said simply, and being included rather than hidden away. James leaned against the counter, loosening his tie. You've been here one day, and you've already done what a string of professional nannies couldn't accomplish in months. I'm not a nanny, Lucy reminded him. I'm just someone who sees your boys for who they are, not who everyone expects them to be. As she turned to leave, James called after her, Lucy, the storage room. I saw the light on earlier. Lucy paused. I was looking for tablecloths, she said, not entirely untruthfully. I found the boxes. James's expression closed off. Those are private. Of course, Lucy nodded. But James, your boys are trying to remember their mother while you're trying to forget. That conflict is part of what's tearing them apart. With that gentle observation hanging in the air between them, Lucy left James standing alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of an unexpectedly successful evening. A week into Lucy's tenure at the Kingsley estate, subtle changes had begun to ripple through the household. The twins' explosive tantrums, while not entirely eliminated, had decreased in both frequency and intensity. Mornings unfolded with a new rhythm, Lucy's consistent routine providing a framework that seemed to settle the boys' anxieties. James observed these changes with cautious optimism, keeping a deliberate distance as was his custom. From his home office, he would catch glimpses of Lucy and the twins engaged in what she called purposeful play, activities disguised as games, but designed to help the boys process their emotions and rebuild their sense of security. On this particular morning, James paused in the doorway of the sunroom, watching as Lucy and the twins sat cross-legged on a circle of cushions. Between them lay an assortment of colored stones, feathers, and small wooden figures. "Remember," Lucy was saying, "there's no right or wrong way to build your memory garden. It's just a special place to keep the things that make you think of your mum." James felt his chest tighten. He had explicitly instructed previous nannies to avoid bringing up Claire unless the boys did so first, a strategy the child psychologist had recommended to avoid triggering emotional distress. Yet here was Lucy, deliberately, steering into the very waters he'd been careful to avoid. "I remember Mummy liked yellow flowers," Oscar said softly, selecting a small yellow stone and placing it carefully in the center of his cushion. "She said they were like tiny suns," Oliver added, choosing a similar stone for his own arrangement. Lucy nodded encouragingly. "That's beautiful. A garden needs sunshine, doesn't it?" James cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. Lucy met his gaze steadily. "Morning ritual. We're creating memory gardens, safe places to keep special thoughts." "I specifically ask that," James began, but Lucy rose and approached him, guiding him slightly away from the boys, who remained absorbed in their task. "James," she said, quietly, her voice gentle but firm, "they need to talk about her. Keeping Claire's memory locked away is teaching them that grief is something shameful, something to hide. They're not fragile. They're resilient. But resilience comes from facing difficult emotions, not avoiding them." James glanced at his sons, their small faces concentrated and peaceful, a stark contrast to the volatile expressions that had become so common in recent months. The psychologist said, "With all due respect," Lucy interrupted, "that psychologist saw them for an hour a week in a clinical setting. I'm with them every day in their home. They're ready for this. They've been ready." Before James could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. "We'll discuss this later," he said, retreating to his office. But the image of his sons, calmly arranging tokens in memory of their mother, lingered. It was the first time in months he'd heard them speak of Claire without dissolving into tears or rage. Later that afternoon, while the twins were at their swimming lesson with their sports coach, Lucy knocked on James's office door. "Got a minute?" she asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. James looked up from his laptop, arching an eyebrow at her casual disregard for the boundaries his staff typically observed. "Is something wrong with the boys?" "The boys are fine," Lucy said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "It's their dad I'm worried about." James leaned back, crossing his arms. "I don't recall hiring you as my therapist, Ms. Lawson." "Lucy," she corrected automatically. "And no, you hired me to help your children, but they don't exist in isolation, James. Their well-being is directly connected to yours." "I'm managing," he said, echoing his response from their first meeting. "Are you?" Lucy challenged gently. "Because from where I'm sitting, you're working 16-hour days, barely interacting with your sons, and have packed away every trace of your late wife as though she never existed." James's jaw tightened. "You're overstepping." "Probably," Lucy agreed with a small smile that softened her words. "But someone needs to. Those boys aren't just missing their mother, they're missing their father too. You're physically present but emotionally absent. You have no idea what I'm dealing with," James said, his voice low and controlled. "Running a company, raising 2 children alone." "You're right," Lucy interrupted. "I don't know what it's like to be in your specific shoes, but I do know what it's like to be a child who feels invisible to the adults who are supposed to care for them. And I know that grief doesn't get smaller when you ignore it. It just goes underground and emerges in different ways." James stared at her, momentarily at a loss for words. In his professional life, no one dared speak to him with such direct honesty. The respect his wealth and position commanded had created a buffer of deference that few people breached. "What exactly are you suggesting?" he finally asked. Lucy leaned forward. "Join us, be present, start with dinner. Not just physically at the table, but actually there. No phone, no distracted nods while your mind is on work. The boys need to see that their father is solid ground beneath their feet, especially when everything else feels unstable. I have commitments. 1 hour, Lucy pressed. Every evening. Surely the company can spare you for that long. Something in her unwavering gaze, not judging but firmly expectant, prompted James to nod. Fine. I'll clear my schedule from 6 to 7. Lucy's face broke into a warm smile. Good. We'll start tonight. That evening, dinner at the Kingsley house took on a different character. Instead of the boys eating separately with Lucy, while James worked or took business calls, all four sat together at the large kitchen island, rather than the formal dining room. "Why are we eating here?" Oliver asked, looking curiously at his father's unexpected presence. "Because," Lucy explained, setting down a simple meal of roast chicken and vegetables, "your dad had a brilliant idea for a new family tradition, kitchen dinners, where everyone shares the best part of their day." James shot her a look. This had not been his idea, but played along. "Who wants to go first?" "Me!" Oliver's hand shot up. "The best part of my day was when I swam all the way across the pool without my floaties." "Excellent," James nodded, surprised by the swell of pride he felt at this milestone he hadn't witnessed. "How about you, Oscar?" Oscar, always more reserved, considered the question seriously. "When Lucy helped me write a poem about dinosaurs," he finally said. "It rhymed and everything." "I'd love to hear it sometime," James said, earning a shy smile from his quieter son. "Your turn, Lucy," Oliver insisted. Lucy pretended to think hard. "Well, there was this moment this morning when I saw two very brave boys talking about their mum and the yellow flowers she loved. That was pretty special." The twins nodded solemnly, and James felt a pang in his chest at how naturally Lucy acknowledged Claire, bringing her presence into the room without drama or excessive emotion. "Dad's turn," Oscar said, looking expectantly at his father. James, accustomed to discussing business developments or market projections, found himself momentarily at a loss. What had been the best part of his day? His mind sifted through conference calls and emails before landing on the moment he'd paused in the doorway earlier. "Seeing you both so peaceful this morning," he said honestly. "Building your memory gardens." The twins exchanged glances of surprise and pleasure. "Can we show you our gardens after dinner?" Oliver asked tentatively. "We kept them on the windowsill." "I'd like that," James said, realizing with some surprise that he meant it. After dinner, as promised, the twins proudly displayed their arrangements of stones, feathers, and small treasures. Each item, Lucy explained, represented a memory or quality of their mother. "This shell is because Mummy loved the beach," Oscar explained. "And this smooth stone is because her voice was smooth when she read stories," Oliver added. James listened, his throat tight with emotion he typically kept firmly in check. When Oscar hesitantly held out a blue stone, offering it to his father to add to the collection, James accepted it with a gravity that honored his son's gesture. "What does blue represent?" he asked softly. "Mummy's favorite dress," Oscar replied, "the one she wore to our birthday." James placed the stone carefully among the others, aware of Lucy watching from a respectful distance, her expression thoughtful but approving. Later, after the twins were tucked in bed, a process that, for the first time in months, didn't involve tears or tantrums, James found Lucy on the terrace gazing out at the city lights. "That was," he began, struggling to find the right words. "A start," Lucy supplied, turning to face him. "A good one." James nodded, leaning against the railing beside her. "You were right, about the boys needing to talk about Claire, and about you needing to be present," Lucy added quietly. "Perhaps," James conceded, offering a rare small smile. "But don't let it go to your head, Lawson. One successful dinner doesn't solve everything." Lucy laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Wouldn't dream of it, boss. We've got a long road ahead." Looking out at the harbour, James felt something shift slightly within him, a loosening of the rigid control he'd maintained since Claire's death. It was uncomfortable, even frightening, but also somehow necessary. The following weeks brought a tentative new equilibrium to the Kingsley household. The dinner ritual continued each evening, becoming a touchstone that anchored the family's days. The twins still had difficult moments, nightmares that sent them crawling into Lucy's bed in the early hours, occasional meltdowns when the weight of their loss pressed too heavily, but a fragile stability had begun to take root. Lucy had established what she called weather check-ins with the boys each morning, using a simple chart with various weather patterns to help them identify and express their emotions. "I'm feeling a bit cloudy today," Oscar announced one morning, pointing to the partly cloudy icon. "But not stormy." "That's perfectly okay," Lucy assured him. "Everyone has cloudy days. Anything in particular making the clouds come?" Oscar thought for a moment. "I dreamed about Mummy, but I couldn't see her face very well. It made me sad." James, who had begun joining these morning check-ins when his schedule allowed, felt the familiar tightening in his chest that accompanied any mention of Claire. But following Lucy's example, he kept his expression open and encouraging. "I have trouble remembering exactly what Mum looked like sometimes too," Oliver admitted, selecting the same weather icon as his brother. "It's scary." Lucy nodded understandingly. "That happens with memories. They can get a bit fuzzy around the edges. That's why photos can be so important." The twins exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "But we don't have any photos," Oliver said finally. "They all disappeared after Mummy went to heaven." James felt the weight of 3 pairs of eyes turn to him. The pointed observation hung in the air, impossible to ignore or deflect. "They didn't disappear," he said finally. "I put them away, for safekeeping. But how can we remember her properly?" "Without them?" Oscar asked, his voice small but direct. Before James could formulate a response, his phone rang, the special tone he'd assigned to his executive team for urgent matters. "I have to take this," he said, relief and guilt mingling as he retreated from the conversation. From his office, he could hear Lucy smoothly redirecting the boys, suggesting they draw what they remembered of their mother instead. Her ability to navigate emotional waters that felt treacherously deep to James continued to both impress and unsettle him. Later that day, James returned from a meeting to find Lucy in the storage room, surrounded by the boxes he'd carefully packed away after Claire's death. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice sharper than intended. Lucy looked up calmly. "Creating a memory book for the boys. They need visual anchors for their memories, James. I'm not unpacking everything, just selecting a few photos for each of them to have." James moved to object, but Lucy continued, her voice gentle but firm. "I understand this is painful for you, truly, but consider what message it sends to Oliver and Oscar when every trace of their mother has been erased from their home. It tells them that grief is too big, too scary to face, that it's better to pretend someone never existed than to miss them." James sank onto a nearby chair, suddenly exhausted. "I was trying to protect them," he said quietly. "And myself, if I'm honest. The psychologist said to give them time before reintroducing reminders that might trigger their grief." With respect to the psychologist, Lucy said, setting aside a photo of Claire holding the newborn twins, "Grief isn't something you get over before returning to normal life. It becomes part of normal life. The boys aren't going to suddenly stop missing their mother. The goal isn't to move past Claire. It's to learn how to carry her memory in a way that honors her, without being overwhelmed by loss." James studied Lucy, struck again by the wisdom that seemed at odds with her relatively young age and casual demeanor. "You speak from experience," he observed. Lucy nodded, her hands stilling on the photo album. "My parents died when I was 7. Car accident. I bounced through the foster system after that, some homes better than others." She met his gaze directly. "The worst weren't the ones where people were unkind. They were the ones where I wasn't allowed to talk about my parents or keep their photos. It was like losing them twice." The personal revelation, delivered without self-pity or drama, shifted something in James's perception of the unorthodox woman who had so quickly become essential to his family's functioning. "What do you propose?" he asked finally. "A middle ground," Lucy suggested. "We don't need to turn the house into a shrine, but maybe we could create a memory corner in the boys' room. A few photos, some of Claire's favorite books, perhaps that jewelry box Oscar mentioned she loved. Touchstones that make her feel present rather than erased." James considered the proposition, his instinct to maintain tight control warring with the evidence of Lucy's approach yielding results where all others had failed. "All right," he agreed cautiously, "but I'd like to select the items with you." Lucy's smile was warm with approval. "Of course, it should come from both of us." That evening, after the twins were asleep, James and Lucy spent hours sifting through the boxes of Claire's belongings. What began as a solemn task gradually evolved into something different as James found himself sharing stories that accompanied various items. "This was from our honeymoon in Bali," he explained, holding a small carved wooden turtle. "Claire insisted on buying souvenirs from every local artisan we met. By the end of the trip, we needed an extra suitcase." Lucy listened attentively, asking questions that invited further reminiscence rather than shutting it down. To his surprise, James found that speaking of Claire actually saying her name aloud and recalling specific memories wasn't as unbearable as he'd feared. There was pain, certainly, but also a curious lightening, as though each story shared lifted a fraction of the weight he'd been carrying. "She sounds remarkable," Lucy said as they arranged the selected items in a small wooden box, Claire's jewelry box, which would form the centerpiece of the memory corner. "She was," James agreed, running his fingers over a pearl necklace that had been Claire's favorite. "The complete opposite of me in many ways. Spontaneous, creative, always ready to drop everything for an adventure. The boys inherited that spirit." "I see a lot of you in them too," Lucy observed. "Oscar's thoughtfulness, the way Oliver analyzes problems. They're a perfect blend." James closed the jewelry box carefully. "Thank you for pushing this," he said quietly. I think Claire would have approved of your approach." Lucy gathered the remaining items to return to storage. "That's high praise, coming from you." "Don't get used to it," James warned, but his tone held a warmth that had been absent in their earlier interactions. The following morning, they unveiled the memory corner to the twins. Lucy had arranged the selected photos, the jewelry box, and a few meaningful objects on a small table in the boys' bedroom, complete with a soft reading lamp and 2 comfortable cushions. "This is a special place where you can come to feel close to your mum," she explained. "You can talk to her here, look at her pictures, or just sit quietly if that's what you need." The twins approached the display with solemn reverence, their small fingers touching each item with gentle wonder. "Can we add things to it?" Oliver asked. "Of course," James answered, surprising himself with how naturally the response came. "This is your space with Mum. You can change it or add to it whenever you like." Oscar looked up at his father, his eyes bright with emotion, but not tears. "Thank you, Daddy," he said simply, before turning back to study a photo of Claire laughing on a beach, her copper hair, so similar to Lucy's, blowing in the wind. James felt Lucy's hand touch his arm briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the significance of the moment. He nodded slightly, acknowledging both her contribution and the unexpected easing he felt at seeing Claire's presence, restored in this small but meaningful way to their home. That night, for the first time since Lucy's arrival, neither twin appeared at her bedroom door, seeking comfort from nightmares. When she checked on them in the early hours, she found them sleeping peacefully, Oscar clutching a framed photo of his mother, Oliver with his hand resting on the jewelry box, as though maintaining a connection, even in sleep. Progress, Lucy thought, comes in small, quiet moments like these, not in dramatic breakthroughs, but in the gentle restoration of what had been broken. The school call came on a Tuesday afternoon, just as Lucy was preparing the twins' afternoon snack. Oliver had gotten into a fight during recess. Nothing serious, but the school required a parent or guardian to pick him up for the remainder of the day. "I'll come right away," Lucy said, already reaching for her bag. She hesitated before adding, "And I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't contact Mr. Kingsley about this yet. He's in an important meeting, and I'd like to speak with Oliver first." When she arrived at the school, Lucy found Oliver sitting outside the principal's office, his normally confident posture diminished, his gaze fixed firmly on his shoes. "Hey, mate," she said, crouching down to his level. "Rough day." Oliver's chin trembled slightly, but he maintained the stoic expression that reminded Lucy so much of his father. "I'm not sorry," he declared, though his voice lacked conviction. "All right," Lucy nodded, not pushing for an apology. "How about we hear what happened first?" Inside the principal's office, Ms. Chen explained that Oliver had pushed another boy to the ground after the child had made a comment about Oliver not having a real family anymore. "While we understand Oliver has experienced significant loss," Ms. Chen said diplomatically, "physical aggression is never acceptable." Lucy nodded, one hand resting supportively on Oliver's shoulder. "I completely agree. And Oliver and I will have a serious talk about better ways to handle difficult situations." She turned to the boy. "But first, I think we need to acknowledge that Oliver was hurt deeply before he lashed out." The principal nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Of course, the other student has been spoken to about his insensitive comments and will apologize tomorrow." On the drive home, Oliver remained, silent, staring out the window at the passing scenery. "Want to tell me what happened in your words?" Lucy asked, keeping her tone conversational rather than accusatory. "Ethan said I don't have a proper family because my mum is dead and my dad is never around," Oliver blurted out, his words tumbling over each other. "He said we're just pretending to be normal." Lucy absorbed this, carefully, controlling her reaction. That must have hurt a lot. "It made me so angry," Oliver admitted, his small hands curling into fists in his lap. "Like there was a storm inside me and I couldn't stop it." "Feelings that big can be really hard to control," Lucy acknowledged, "especially when someone says something that hurts us that deeply." "Am I in trouble?" Oliver asked, looking up at her with apprehension. "Well, pushing isn't okay even when we're really upset," Lucy said gently, "but I think you already know that. What I'm more interested in is figuring out what you could do next time you feel that angry storm coming." By the time they arrived home, they had brainstormed several strategies for managing intense emotions, and Oliver seemed lighter, as though unburdened by the fear of punishment. Oscar greeted them at the door, having been dropped off by the school driver. His worried expression cleared when he saw his twin. "Are you okay? Everyone was talking about what happened." "I'm okay," Oliver assured him. "Lucy's not even that mad." "I never said that," Lucy corrected with a smile. "But I do understand. Now, who wants to help me make lamingtons for afternoon tea?" Uggy. The twins enthusiastically joined her in the kitchen. Measuring flour and cocoa with exaggerated care, Lucy considered how to approach the incident with James. The conversation would require delicacy, particularly given his tendency to address behavioral issues with logical consequences rather than emotional exploration. James returned home earlier than usual that evening, having received a brief message from Lucy about a school matter to discuss. His expression was guarded as he entered the kitchen where Lucy was preparing dinner. "What happened?" he asked without preamble. "Oliver had a difficult day," Lucy began, keeping her voice low to prevent the twins, who were playing in the adjacent room, from overhearing. "He pushed another boy who made some unkind comments about your family." "Situation?" James's jaw tightened. "I'll speak with him." "Before you do," Lucy said, placing a hand on his arm to pause his movement toward the living room, "it might help to know what triggered it." As she relayed Ethan's comments about Oliver not having a proper family, she watched a series of emotions cross James's typically composed face: anger, guilt, and finally, a profound sadness. "I see," he said quietly. "James, this isn't about assigning blame," Lucy assured him, "but I think Oliver's reaction speaks to something deeper. He's wrestling with what family means now, with how to explain his life to others." James nodded, running a hand through his hair. "What did you tell him?" "That his feelings made sense, but his actions didn't help. We talked about other ways to handle big emotions, and how words can be more powerful than pushing." Lucy hesitated before adding, "But I think he needs to hear from you what family means now. That different doesn't mean broken." That evening, after dinner, James asked Oliver to join him in his study, a room the twins rarely entered. It was a space preserved for work, its leather and mahogany furnishings creating an atmosphere of serious contemplation. Lucy, helping Oscar with a puzzle in the living room, kept one ear attuned to the study door, ready to intervene if needed. But when father and son emerged nearly 40 minutes later, Oliver's expression was calm, even reflective, and James had an arm draped casually across the boy's shoulders, a physical connection that had been rare since Lucy's arrival. Later, after the twins were asleep, James found Lucy on the terrace, her customary evening spot for quiet reflection. "How did it go?" she asked, making room for him on the bench. "Better than I expected," James admitted. "I'm not particularly skilled at these conversations." "What did you tell him?" James gazed out at the harbor lights. "The truth, that families come in all forms, and ours changed shape when Claire died. But it's still a family. That I work too much sometimes, but that doesn't mean I don't think about them constantly." He paused. "I showed him a photo I keep in my desk drawer, one of Claire holding them as newborns. Told him I look at it every day." Lucy smiled softly. "That's exactly what he needed to hear." "There's something else," James added. "The school's holding a father-child camping trip next month. I've always sent my assistant with a donation instead of attending, but—" He shrugged. "I told Oliver I'd go this year." "That's huge, James," Lucy said, genuine warmth in her voice. "He must have been thrilled." "He was skeptical, actually," James chuckled. Asked if I even know how to put up a tent. And do you? Not a clue, James admitted. But I suppose I'll learn. The conversation shifted to practical matters. The logistics of the camping trip, upcoming school events, a planned visit from James's in-laws the following month. It was the most relaxed exchange they'd shared, with none of the careful distance James typically maintained. As they prepared to head inside, Lucy paused. You know what you did today? Making space for that difficult conversation, prioritizing Oliver's emotional needs. That was exceptional parenting. James looked momentarily taken aback by the praise. I'm learning, he said simply, slowly. The best lessons usually take time, Lucy replied. The following weekend brought unusually stormy weather, confining the family to the house. By Sunday afternoon, the twins' energy had reached fever pitch, their games growing. Increasingly rambunctious despite Lucy's attempts to channel their exuberance into structured activities. I've got an idea, James announced, appearing from his study where he'd been attempting to work through the noise. How about we build a fort? The twins froze in mid-chase, their expressions a mixture of surprise and delight. A real fort? Oscar asked. Well, an indoor one, James clarified. With blankets and cushions. Your mother and I used to make them when we were snowed in at our first apartment. It was the first time James had volunteered a memory of Claire so casually, without the weight of grief making the words heavy. Lucy caught his eye, offering a subtle nod of encouragement. For the next hour, the formal living room was transformed. Dining chairs formed the foundation. Blankets created walls and ceilings, and cushions became the floor of an elaborate structure that eventually occupied most of the room. James, to Lucy's surprise, proved to be a skilled architect, rigging a system of books and belts to secure the blankets at optimal heights. This is the best fort ever, Oliver declared, surveying their creation with satisfaction. It needs a name, Oscar decided. How about Castle Kingsley? James suggested. The twins considered this before shaking their heads in unison. No, it should be Fort Sunshine, Oliver announced. Because of Mummy's yellow flowers? Oscar asked. Oliver nodded solemnly. She'd like it. Fort Sunshine it is, James agreed, his voice gentle. As the afternoon progressed into evening, Lucy brought snacks and drinks into the fort, and James, to everyone's astonishment, produced a collection of childhood books from his study. I thought we might have a reading night, he explained. These were some of my favorites when I was your age. Tucked into the cozy space, surrounded by blankets and soft lighting from the camping lantern James had unearthed, the family spent hours taking turns reading stories. The twins, usually restless by evening, remained attentive, occasionally asking questions or making observations about the tales. Lucy, sitting slightly apart, watched the scene with quiet satisfaction. In this makeshift shelter, with rain drumming steadily on the windows outside, something essential was being rebuilt, a sense of family that transcended the loss they had experienced. The invitation to the charity gala arrived on embossed cardstock, its gold lettering announcing the annual Sydney Children's Hospital fundraiser, an event James had supported financially for years, but had never personally attended. You should go, Lucy suggested, when James mentioned declining as he always did. It's for a good cause and you haven't been out socially in ages. James frowned, shuffling through other mail at the breakfast table. It's not really my scene. I'll send a donation as usual. Dad, what's a gala? Oscar asked, looking up from his cereal. It's a fancy party for grown-ups, James explained, where people dress up and raise money for important things like hospitals. Like a ball in the fairy tales? Oliver's eyes widened with interest. Sort of, Lucy smiled, with beautiful dresses and music and dancing. Was Mummy good at dancing? Oscar asked innocently. James's expression softened. The best. She could dance all night. Would she want you to go to the gala? Oliver pressed, fixing his father with a surprisingly perceptive gaze. James hesitated, caught off guard by the question. I suppose she would, he admitted. Your mother loved these events, said they reminded her. Why all the hard work mattered. Then you should go, Oliver declared with the simple logic of a 5-year-old. For Mummy. Later, as Lucy helped the twins prepare for school, James approached her with the invitation in hand. I've decided to attend, he said, somewhat stiffly. Would you be comfortable watching the boys that evening? It's a Saturday, so they'll be up later. Of course, Lucy replied. We'll have a great time. James nodded, turning to leave before pausing. Actually, I was wondering if you might consider accompanying me. Lucy blinked in surprise. To the gala? It's a significant fundraiser, and Claire always said these things were easier with a partner, James explained quickly. Purely as colleagues, of course. Emma could stay with the boys. I see, Lucy said, trying to gauge his expression. Well, that's very kind, but I'm not sure I have anything suitable to wear to such an event. That can be arranged, James replied. If you're willing. Lucy considered the offer. On one hand, attending as James's guest blurred the lines of their professional relationship in ways that might prove complicated. On the other hand, it represented a significant step in his re-emergence into the world beyond work and home, a process she had been gently encouraging. All right, she agreed, but I'd like to be clear that I'm attending as your children's caregiver, not as a date. Absolutely, James nodded, looking relieved. I'll have Emma make the arrangements. The following afternoon, a stylist arrived at the house with a selection of evening gowns for Lucy to try. The twins, fascinated by the proceedings, appointed themselves fashion critics, offering enthusiastic commentary on each option. That one makes you look like a mermaid, Oscar declared when Lucy emerged in a fitted teal gown. I like the sparkly one, Oliver countered, pointing to a champagne-colored dress with subtle beading. Lucy laughed, twirling for their benefit. What do you think? Boys? Which would your mum have chosen? The twins exchanged one of their silent communications before Oscar answered confidently. The green one. Mummy always said green makes people's eyes shine like jewels. The stylist, who had been quietly making adjustments, looked up with interest. He's right, you know. The emerald complements your colouring beautifully. Green it is then, Lucy decided, smiling at the boys. In honour of your mum's excellent taste. On the evening of the gala, Lucy felt a surprising flutter of nervousness as she made final adjustments to her appearance. The emerald gown, with its simple lines and elegant draping, was unlike anything she'd ever worn. Her wild curls had been tamed into a sophisticated updo by the stylist, and subtle makeup enhanced her features, without masking her freckles. When she descended the stairs to the foyer where James waited, she was conscious of presenting a version of herself that bore little resemblance to the casual, practical woman who had arrived at the Kingsley home 2 months earlier. James, impeccable in a classic tuxedo, looked up from checking his watch. For a moment he seemed at a loss for words, his expression unreadable. You look, he began, then paused. Different. Lucy laughed, relieved by his honesty. Good different or concerning different? Good, James clarified quickly. Very good. The dress suits you. The boys chose it, Lucy explained. Said it's what Claire would have picked. A shadow of emotion crossed James's face. They're right. She loved that colour. Emma arrived to supervise the twins who had been allowed to stay up to see Lucy's transformation. They circled her with wide-eyed appreciation. You look like a princess, Oscar declared. A warrior princess, Oliver amended, because you're still Lucy underneath. That's the nicest compliment I've ever received, Lucy told him seriously. As they prepared to depart, Oliver tugged on his father's sleeve. Dad, are you going? To dance with Lucy like you danced with Mummy? James looked momentarily flustered. I don't think, of course he will, Lucy interjected smoothly. That's what people do at galas. Now you two be good for Emma, and we'll tell you all about it tomorrow. The Sydney Children's Hospital Gala transformed the Opera House forecourt into a glittering wonderland, with crystal chandeliers suspended from transparent marquees and views of the harbour, creating a magical backdrop. As James and Lucy moved through the crowd, she was struck by how many people knew him, and how few seemed to know him well. James Kingsley, we didn't expect to see you here in person, exclaimed a distinguished older man. You've been missed at these functions. Had to make an exception for the Children's Hospital, James replied with practiced ease. Howard, this is Lucy Lawson, my son's caregiver. Lucy noted the slight pause before caregiver, as though James had considered and rejected other descriptors. Delighted, Howard said, his gaze curious as it moved between them. And how are those boys of yours? Must be getting big now. They're doing well, James replied, his tone warming at the mention of his sons. Starting to develop distinct personalities. They've always had those, Lucy commented with a smile. They're just more comfortable showing them now. The evening progressed pleasantly enough, with James introducing Lucy to a parade of Sydney's elite. She observed him in this environment, confident, respected, but maintaining a careful distance that few seemed able to bridge. It was the same emotional barrier he had constructed at home, though it was beginning to crumble with his sons. During dinner, seated at a table with several of James's business associates, Lucy found herself drawn into conversation with Victoria Blackwell, the investor who had been so impressed with the twins during her visit to the Kingsley home. "Those boys of James's are remarkable," Victoria commented. "So, poised for their age, especially considering what they've been through." "They're incredibly resilient," Lucy agreed, "and very perceptive." "James seems different too," Victoria observed, her gaze drifting to where he stood speaking with the hospital's chief of pediatrics. "More present somehow. I take it you've had a positive influence on the household?" Lucy considered her response carefully. "I think we've all been figuring things out together. Grief doesn't follow a tidy timeline." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "Claire was wonderful, so vibrant. Her loss left a huge void, not just for James and the boys, but in our community. She had a gift for bringing people together." She studied Lucy with newfound interest. "You remind me of her in some ways. Not in appearance, but in your directness." Before Lucy could respond to this unexpected comparison, the orchestra began playing, signaling the start of the dancing portion of the evening. James returned to the table, extending a hand to Lucy. "I believe I was instructed by my sons to dance with you," he said, a hint of humor in his voice. "Far be it from me to contradict their wishes," Lucy replied, accepting his hand. On the dance floor, James proved to be a skilled partner, guiding her with confidence through a waltz. Lucy, who had learned ballroom basics during a community center program for teens, followed his lead with reasonable grace. "You're full of surprises, Lawson," James commented as they moved among the other couples. "I wouldn't have pegged you for a dancer." "There's a lot you don't know about me," Lucy replied lightly. "Just as there's a lot I don't know about you despite living in your home." James's expression grew thoughtful. "What would you like to know?" The unexpected openness of the question caught Lucy off guard. "Well," she said carefully, "I'd like to know what you hope for. Beyond business success and the boys being okay, what does James Kingsley want for himself?" The music swelled around them as James considered her question with the same seriousness he might give to a complex business proposal. "I'm not sure I know anymore," he admitted finally. "For a long time, it was just about survival, getting through each day, making sure the boys had what they needed, keeping the company stable. I stopped thinking about what I wanted." "And now?" Lucy prompted gently. James's gaze met hers directly. "Now I'm starting to remember that there might be more, that Claire would have wanted more for all of us than just surviving." As the dance ended, they remained momentarily still amid the shifting crowd, something unspoken passing between them, an acknowledgement of change, of possibilities neither had anticipated when Lucy first arrived at the Kingsley home. The morning after the gala, Lucy woke to find a small envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a note in James's precise handwriting. "Thank you for last night. Your presence made a difficult evening considerably less so. Simple, restrained, and yet somehow more meaningful than a more effusive message might have been." Downstairs, the twins were already awake, eager to hear about the fancy party. Lucy obliged with carefully edited highlights as she prepared breakfast, describing the decorations, the music, and the purpose of raising money for sick children. "Did you and Dad dance?" Oliver asked, his expression sly in a way that reminded Lucy of Claire in the photos she'd seen. "We did," Lucy confirmed. "Your father is quite good at it." "Mummy taught him," Oscar said matter-of-factly. "She said he was hopeless until she made him practice every night for a whole month before their wedding." Lucy smiled at this glimpse into James and Claire's relationship. A playful side of him she could only occasionally glimpse beneath his reserved exterior. "Where is your dad this morning?" she asked, realizing she hadn't seen or heard him moving about the house. "In his office," Oliver replied. "He said he had important thinking to do and not to disturb him unless there's an emergency." Lucy nodded, respecting James's need for space after what had likely been an emotionally complex evening for him. The gala would have been full of memories and associations with Claire, who had apparently been a fixture at such events. And then there was the undeniable shift that had occurred between them during their tense, nothing inappropriate, but a moment of genuine connection that transcended their established roles. The weekend passed quietly, with James maintaining a polite but somewhat distant demeanor. Lucy recognized the pattern. Whenever emotional boundaries began to blur, James retreated into work and formality, re-establishing the careful structure that made him feel secure. By Monday morning, however, the household had settled back into its routine. The twins headed off to school. James sequestered himself in his home office for a series of video conferences, and Lucy took advantage of the quiet to tackle some administrative tasks she'd been postponing. She was organizing the boys' outgrown clothes for donation when her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. "Is this Lucy Lawson?" a female voice asked when she answered. "Yes, speaking." "This is Margaret Williams, director of the Bayside Children's Centre in Melbourne. I'm calling about a position we discussed before you left for Sydney." Lucy's heart quickened. The Bayside Centre had been her dream job, a newly established facility working with children from difficult backgrounds using innovative approaches to trauma and emotional regulation. She had interviewed for a leadership role just days before Emma's call about the Kingsley twins had derailed her plans. "Of course, Ms. Williams. I remember our conversation. I'm pleased to inform you that the board has approved your appointment as our new program director," Margaret continued. "We were very impressed with your vision for the centre and your experience." Lucy sank onto the edge of the bed, emotions colliding. 6 months ago, this call would have represented everything she'd worked toward. Validation of her methods, an opportunity to impact hundreds of children rather than a handful, a chance to build something lasting. I don't know what to say," Lucy managed. "This is unexpected." "I understand you've taken a temporary position in Sydney," Margaret said. "However, we're hoping you might be able to join us in 4 weeks when our funding officially begins. The salary and benefits package is quite competitive. Could I have a few days to consider? My current situation is complicated." "Of course. We can give you until Friday for a decision." After ending the call, Lucy sat motionless, staring out the window at the harbour view. When she'd accepted the position with the Kingsley family, she had viewed it as a brief detour, a chance to help one family while waiting for the right opportunity to pursue her broader goals. She hadn't anticipated how deeply she would come to care for the twins, or how invested she would become in their healing journey. And James, the complexity of her feelings about him, was something she had been carefully avoiding examining too closely. Later that afternoon, Lucy met the twins at the school gate, their faces lighting up at the sight of her as they always did. On the drive home, they chatted about their day. Oscar's artwork had been selected for display. Oliver had been chosen as line leader for the week. "Can we have a picnic dinner in the garden?" Oliver asked as they pulled into the driveway. "It's not raining anymore." "That sounds lovely," Lucy agreed. "Let's ask your dad if he can join us." To her surprise, James not only agreed to the picnic, but actively participated in the preparations, helping the boys select appropriate foods and locating a seldom-used basket in the pantry. "This was Claire's," he explained, dusting off the wicker container. "She was always arranging impromptu picnics. Said food tasted better outdoors." The casual mention of Claire, without pain shadowing his features, marked yet another small step in James's healing process. These moments had been occurring with increasing frequency, each one a quiet victory. As they spread blankets on the lawn overlooking the harbour, the golden afternoon light bathing everything in a warm glow, Lucy found herself struggling to imagine walking away from this family. The Bayside position represented professional advancement and the chance to help many children, but here, with the Kingsleys, she had found something equally valuable, a place where she was needed in a way that went beyond professional fulfillment. During dinner, as the twins invented increasingly elaborate stories about the ships passing, in the harbour, James leaned slightly closer to Lucy. "You've been quiet today," he observed. "Everything all right?" Lucy hesitated, uncertain whether to share her news. "I received an interesting phone call," she said finally. "A job offer from a children's centre in Melbourne. It's the position I was hoping for before I came here." James's expression remained neutral, but she noted the slight tensing of his shoulders. "I see. Congratulations are in order, then." "I haven't decided yet," Lucy clarified. "It's a complicated decision." James nodded, his gaze shifting to the twins, who were now engaged in a debate about whether seagulls could understand human language. "The boys would miss you," he said after a moment. "They've become quite attached." "And I to them," Lucy replied. Softly, "When would you need to leave?" 4 weeks if I accept." James was silent for a long moment. "Well," he said finally, his tone deliberately light. "We always knew your position here was temporary. The boys are doing much better now. Perhaps it's good timing." Lucy studied his profile, trying to discern his true feelings beneath the practiced composure. "Is that what you think? That it's good timing?" Before James could respond, Oliver flopped dramatically across both their laps, demanding attention for his latest observation about cloud shapes. The moment for candor passed, leaving Lucy's question hanging unanswered in the space between them. That night, after the twins were asleep, Lucy found herself drawn to the memory corner they had created in the boys' room. In the soft glow of the small lamp, Claire's face smiled from various photographs. At the beach, holding newborn twins, laughing with James at what appeared to be a holiday party. "What would you do?" Lucy whispered to the images. "They're your family, not mine. I was only ever meant to be passing through." The photographs offered no answers, but as Lucy turned to leave, her gaze fell on a small drawing Oscar had recently added to the display. A childish rendering of 4 figures holding hands, 2 small ones labeled Oliver and Oscar, 1 tall one labeled Dad, and a 4th with wild curly hair labeled Lucy. Above them, a yellow sun wore a smiling face with the words "Mummy watching" written beside it. The simple drawing crystallized Lucy's dilemma. In the twins' eyes, she had become part of their family narrative, not replacing their mother, but carving out her own place in their story. Walking away now would mean another loss for children who had already experienced too much disruption. And yet, the Bayside position represented the culmination of years of work and planning, a chance to create programs that could help countless children like Oliver and Oscar. Could she justify turning it down for the sake of one family, no matter how attached she had become? As she returned to her room, Lucy caught sight of James on the terrace, his solitary figure silhouetted against the night sky. Despite the progress of recent weeks, there remained a fundamental uncertainty about his feelings, both regarding her place in the family and his own readiness to move forward emotionally. Lucy faced the truth she had been avoiding. Her decision wasn't just about professional opportunity versus personal attachment. It was also about acknowledging the complex emotions that had developed between her and James, emotions neither of them had been prepared for when she first arrived. The scheduled visit from James's in-laws coincided with Lucy's deadline to respond to the job offer, adding another layer of complexity to an already tense week. Eleanor and Richard Hampton had maintained a cordial but somewhat distant relationship with James since Claire's death, their grief creating barriers that none of them had fully managed to overcome. "Grammy and Grandpa are coming today," Oliver announced at breakfast, his excitement evident. "Grammy always brings special treats from her bakery. And Grandpa tells the best dinosaur stories," Oscar added. James, checking emails on his phone, offered a distracted nod. "They'll be here for lunch. Their flight gets in at 11. Lucy, who had never met the Hamptons, felt a flutter of apprehension. As Claire's parents, they represented a connection to the boy's mother that she could never provide, regardless of how long she remained with the family. Their visit would inevitably shift the dynamic that had been established in recent months. "Is there anything special I should know about their preferences?" Lucy asked James as she cleared the breakfast dishes. "For meals or the boys' routine?" James looked up from his phone, his expression unreadable. "Eleanor likes things done her way. She'll probably have opinions about everything from the boys' haircuts to how the napkins are folded." He paused. They were very close to Claire. This isn't easy for them. "Of course," Lucy nodded. "I'll make myself scarce if that would help." "No," James said quickly. "The boys will want you involved. Just be prepared for Eleanor to be protective. She worries that Claire is being forgotten." The Hamptons arrived precisely on schedule, their taxi pulling up to the house just as Lucy finished helping the twins change into the nice clothes James had requested they wear. Eleanor Hampton was a petite woman, with Claire's copper hair now faded to a soft strawberry blonde, while Richard was tall and lean with the same thoughtful eyes Oscar had inherited. The reunion with their grandsons was joyful, with hugs and exclamations about how much the boys had grown. James greeted his in-laws with polite warmth, accepting Eleanor's critical assessment of his apparent weight loss with good humor. When introductions to Lucy were made, Eleanor's gaze was evaluating, but not unkind. "So you're the miracle worker we've heard about," she said. "The boys' letters have been full of Lucy this and Lucy that for weeks." "I don't know about miracles," Lucy replied with a smile, "but we've been having fun together, haven't we, boys?" Lunch progressed smoothly enough, with conversation focusing primarily on the twins' school activities and Richard's recent retirement from his dental practice. Eleanor, true to James's warning, offered several gentle corrections to the way Lucy had arranged the table, though her suggestions were framed as helpful advice rather than criticism. After the meal, James excused himself for a conference call he couldn't reschedule, leaving Lucy with the grandparents and the twins. The boys were eager to show off their memory corner, leading Eleanor and Richard upstairs with excited chatter. Lucy followed at a respectful distance, aware that this moment belonged primarily to the Hamptons. Watching from the doorway as the twins proudly explained each item in the display, she saw Eleanor's composure falter for the first time. "This was Claire's jewelry box," Eleanor said softly, running her fingers over the carved wooden lid. "I gave it to her when she turned 16. It's where we keep our special memories of Mummy," Oscar explained earnestly. "Lucy helped us make it. She says it's important to remember the happy things, not just the sad ones." Eleanor's gaze shifted to Lucy, something softening in her expression. "That's very wise," she said quietly. Later, while the twins showed their grandfather the new treehouse James had recently built in the garden, Eleanor joined Lucy in the kitchen as she prepared afternoon tea. "I wasn't sure what to expect from you," Eleanor admitted, leaning against the counter. "When James mentioned hiring someone with no formal qualifications, I was concerned." Lucy concentrated on arranging cookies on a plate. "That's understandable. You want what's best for your grandsons." "I do," Eleanor agreed, "which is why I'm grateful for whatever you've done here. This is the first time since Claire died that I've seen those boys truly settled. And James," she shook her head slightly, "he's actually present in a way he hasn't been for months. They're remarkable people," Lucy said simply. "All three of them. They just needed time and space to find their way through this." Eleanor studied her with renewed interest. "You care for them, not just professionally." It wasn't a question, but Lucy answered anyway. "Yes, very much. And yet I understand you're considering a position back in Melbourne." Lucy looked up in surprise. "How did you—" "James mentioned it when he picked us up from the airport," Eleanor explained. "He seemed quite certain you'd be leaving soon." Lucy absorbed this information with a pang. Despite her indecision, James was already preparing for her departure, perhaps even anticipating it. "It's a difficult decision," she said finally. "The position in Melbourne is something I've worked toward for years, an opportunity to help many children." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "Claire faced a similar choice once. Did you know that? She was offered a prestigious curator position at the National Gallery right after the twins were born. It would have been a significant step in her career." "What did she decide?" Lucy asked, genuinely curious. "She turned it down," Eleanor replied. "Not because she didn't value her professional goals, but because she recognized that different seasons of life call for different priorities." She smiled softly. "Claire always said she never regretted her decision, though I know James worried that she had sacrificed too much." The conversation stayed with Lucy. Throughout the afternoon, as the family gathered for games in the garden, the twins delighting in having both their grandparents and Lucy participating in their invented competitions. James joined them after finishing his call, and Lucy noticed how Eleanor watched her son-in-law's interactions with both the boys and Lucy herself, missing nothing. That evening, after the twins were in bed, the adults gathered on the terrace with glasses of wine. The conversation flowed more easily than Lucy had expected, with Richard sharing stories of Claire's childhood that had James smiling in recognition. "She was always rescuing things," Richard recalled. "Injured birds, stray cats, neglected plants. Anything that needed care, Claire was there with her determined little face, insisting we had to help." "That never changed," James said, his voice warm with memory. "Our first apartment was like a wildlife sanctuary. I never knew what I'd find when I came home." "The boys have inherited that quality," Lucy observed. "Oscar spent 20 minutes yesterday carefully relocating spiders from the bathroom to the garden because they have families too, Lucy." The shared laughter felt like a release, acknowledgement that remembering Claire with joy rather than just sorrow was not only acceptable, but necessary. When Lucy excused herself to check on the twins before turning in, Eleanor followed her to the hallway. "Lucy," she said quietly, "I want you to know that whatever you decide about Melbourne, you've given this family a precious gift. You've helped them remember how to be a family." Again, Lucy felt tears prick at her eyes. Thank you. That means a great deal coming from you. Eleanor squeezed her hand briefly before returning to the terrace, leaving Lucy to make her nightly rounds. She found the twins sleeping peacefully, Oscar clutching the stuffed koala she had given him, Oliver with one arm flung protectively across his brother's pillow. The sight crystallized something within her, a recognition that some connections transcended professional boundaries and careful planning. Whatever she decided about Bayside, these children and their father had become more than a job to her. Much more. Later, unable to sleep, Lucy stepped onto her private balcony, gazing out at the moonlit harbour. The deadline for her decision loomed, and clarity remained elusive. The rational choice seemed obvious: accept the Melbourne position, advance her career, impact more children's lives. And yet, a soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Opening it, she found James standing in the hallway, his expression hesitant. "I saw your light," he explained. "Thought you might still be awake." "Just thinking," Lucy replied, stepping back to allow him entry. A first in their months of cohabitation. James remained near the door, hands in his pockets. "Eleanor likes you," he said. "That's not something she extends easily to people involved with the boys." "I like her too," Lucy said. "She reminds me of Claire, from the photos and the boys' stories." James nodded, his gaze drifting to the harbour view. "Have you decided? About Melbourne?" The directness of the question caught Lucy off guard. "Not yet," she admitted. "I need to call tomorrow." "What's holding you back?" James asked, his tone carefully neutral. "It's clearly an excellent opportunity." Lucy hesitated, weighing honesty against prudence. "The boys," she said finally. "Leaving them feels wrong somehow. Like I'd be breaking a promise I never explicitly made, but somehow still gave." "They'd adjust," James said, though something in his voice suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as her. "Children are resilient, as you've often reminded me." "And you?" Lucy asked quietly. "Would you adjust?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken complexities. James's gaze met hers, the careful mask of professional distance slipping momentarily. "I've had practice with loss," he said softly, "but that doesn't make it easier." The morning Lucy was scheduled to give her answer to Bayside Children's Centre dawned clear and bright, Sydney Harbour glittering like scattered diamonds beneath the rising sun. She had barely slept, her mind circling endlessly around the decision that loomed before her. By dawn, she had risen and gone for a long run along the coastal path, hoping the physical exertion might bring clarity where rational thought had failed. When she returned to the house, she found the kitchen unusually quiet. Normally, the twins would be at the breakfast table by now, James reviewing emails on his tablet while supervising their morning routine. Instead, she found a note propped against the coffee maker in James's precise handwriting. "Took the boys for DR. Breakfast at the beachside cafe. Back by 9. J." The absence felt deliberate, giving her space to make her call without distractions or emotional complications. It was a thoughtful gesture, and entirely characteristic of James's careful consideration. Yet Lucy couldn't help feeling a pang at the emptiness of the house that had become her home. After showering and changing, Lucy sat on the edge of her bed, phone in hand. Margaret Williams answered on the second ring. "Lucy, good morning. I've been looking forward to your call." "Thank you for your patience, Margaret," Lucy replied, her voice steady despite her churning emotions. "I've given the position a great deal of thought." "And your decision?" Lucy took a deep breath, the certainty she had reached during her run crystallizing into words. "I'm deeply honored by the offer, but I need to decline. My work here isn't finished, and I believe I can make the greatest difference by seeing it through." There was a brief silence before Margaret responded. "I can't say I'm not disappointed, Lucy. You were our first choice, but I respect your commitment to your current charges. Thank you for understanding. The Bayside Centre is doing vital work, and I hope our paths might cross again in the future." After ending the call, Lucy felt a curious mixture of emotions wash over her, regret for the opportunity foregone, but beneath it, a profound sense of rightness. She had made her choice not from fear of change or lack of ambition, but from recognition of where her heart and talents were most needed at this moment in her life. She was still sitting quietly when she heard the front door open, followed by the unmistakable sound of the twins' excited voices echoing through the house. "Lucy! Lucy! "We brought you a surprise," Oliver called, his footsteps thundering up the stairs. She opened her door to find both boys clutching paper bags from the cafe, their faces alight with anticipation. "We got you your favorite muffin," Oscar explained, offering his bag. "The blueberry one with the crunchy top. And hot chocolate with extra marshmallows," Oliver added, presenting his contribution. "Dad said you might need cheering up today because you have a big decision." Lucy accepted their offerings with genuine gratitude. "That's incredibly thoughtful of you both. Thank you." James appeared behind them, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes were watchful. "Boys, why don't you go unpack the rest of breakfast in the kitchen? Lucy will join us in a minute." Once the twins had scampered off, James leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets, a posture she had come to recognize as his attempt at casual conversation when the subject was anything but. "Did you make your call?" he asked quietly. Lucy nodded. "I did. And?" "I declined the position." Something flickered across James's face, relief, perhaps, or surprise, before his customary reserve reasserted itself. "That's unexpected. May I ask why?" Lucy considered how to articulate the complex web of reasons that had led to her decision. Because sometimes, the most important work isn't about reaching the most people, but about being fully present for the specific people who need you right now. She smiled softly. "A wise woman recently reminded me that different seasons of life call for different priorities." "Eleanor," James guessed, a hint of amusement warming his voice. "She mentioned Claire faced a similar choice once." James nodded, his expression growing reflective. "The National Gallery position. I told her she should take, that we'd make it work somehow. But she insisted the boys needed stability more than she needed career advancement at that moment." He paused. "I always wondered if she regretted it." "Did you ask her?" "Once," James admitted. "She said regret was the wrong word entirely, that she'd made a conscious choice about what mattered most in that season of her life, and that choice had brought its own rewards." Lucy understood with sudden clarity that Claire's wisdom continued to guide this family, even in her absence. "She sounds like she knew exactly who she was, and what she valued." "She did," James agreed. "It was one of the things I loved most about her." He straightened, his posture shifting subtly. "Lucy, your decision, it's not just about the boys, is it?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. In all their months together, James had carefully avoided any conversation that might venture into personal territory beyond their professional relationship and shared concern for the twins. "No," Lucy admitted, meeting his gaze steadily. "It's not just about the boys." James took a step closer, the careful distance he typically maintained between them diminishing. "I haven't been fair to you," he said quietly. "I've relied on you, depended on you even," he hesitated, "come to care for you, while never acknowledging how the boundaries between us have shifted." "You were grieving," Lucy said gently. "Still are, in many ways." "Yes," James agreed. "But grief isn't an excuse for emotional cowardice. You deserved better than my ambivalence." Before Lucy could respond, Oscar's voice called up the stairs. "Dad, Lucy, the eggs are getting cold and Oliver's threatening to eat everything." James smiled, the tension of the moment breaking. "We should probably go down before a breakfast rebellion begins." "Probably," Lucy agreed, returning his smile. "But James, this conversation, I'd like to finish it. Tonight," he promised, "after the boys are asleep." The day unfolded with an undercurrent of anticipation beneath the usual routines. The twins, sensing something significant in the air, though not understanding its nature, were especially affectionate, finding excuses to stay close to Lucy throughout the afternoon. "Are you going to stay with us forever?" Oscar asked as she helped him with a particularly challenging puzzle. Lucy smoothed his hair gently. "I'm not going anywhere right now," she assured him. "I'm staying as long as you and your dad need me." "Good," Oscar declared with childish certainty, "because we do need you, even Dad. He smiles more when you're here." That evening, after the twins were tucked in bed with extra stories and snuggles, Lucy found herself on the terrace, the place where so many of her significant conversations with James had unfolded. The night was unusually clear, stars visible despite the city lights, the air carrying the salt-tinged scent of the harbor. When James joined her, he carried 2 glasses of wine, offering one to her as he settled beside her on the bench. "To decisions," he said, raising his glass slightly. "To new seasons," Lucy responded, touching her glass to his. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the gentle lapping of waves against the shore below providing a soothing backdrop. When Claire died, James began, his voice quiet but steady, I thought I understood what grief would be. I expected sadness, pain, loneliness. What I didn't expect was the fear. Lucy turned to face him, giving him her full attention. Fear, she prompted gently when he didn't continue. James nodded, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. Fear of loving again, of opening myself to that kind of loss a second time. It seemed unbearable. And now? Lucy asked, her heart beating a little faster. James turned to her, the careful mask he typically wore set aside, allowing her to see the vulnerability beneath. Now I'm more afraid of not loving, of teaching my sons that safety means isolation, of missing what's right in front of me because I'm too focused on what I've lost. He reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on the bench between them. I can't promise I'll be good at this, Lucy. Moving forward, opening up. It's unfamiliar territory, but I'd like to try if you're willing. Lucy felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from the profound recognition of what this moment cost him, and what it offered them both. I'm willing, she said softly. Very willing. James's smile in response was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way she had rarely seen. Then perhaps we could start with something simple. Dinner, just the two of us, somewhere that isn't this house or a charity function. Lucy laughed, the tension of the moment breaking. Are you asking me on a date, Mr. Kingsley? I believe I am, Miss Lawson, he replied, a hint of his dry humour returning. Though, at our age, perhaps date sounds a bit juvenile. I like juvenile, Lucy decided, squeezing his hand. And yes, I'd love to have dinner with you. As they sat together under the stars, hands intertwined, Lucy felt the rightness of her decision settle into certainty. The path ahead wouldn't be simple. There would be complexities to navigate, boundaries to redefine, expectations to manage, but it was a path worth taking, step by careful step. 3 months later, on a perfect spring morning, the Kingsley garden bloomed with new life. Roses climbed trellises, native flowers created bursts of colour among the greenery, and a newly installed butterfly garden buzzed with activity near the twins' treehouse. The transformation of the once pristine but somewhat sterile landscape mirrored the evolving household within, still elegant but warmer, more vibrant, alive with possibilities. Lucy knelt in the vegetable patch she had established with the boys, helping them harvest carrots they had planted weeks earlier. Oscar examined each specimen with scientific precision, categorizing them by size and shape, while Oliver preferred to speculate on what creatures might have nibbled the more irregularly formed ones. Do you think Dad will like our carrots in the salad tonight? Oscar asked, carefully placing his selections in the basket. I think he'll be incredibly impressed, Lucy assured him. Growing your own food is something to be proud of. Is Belle coming for a dinner too? Oliver inquired, referring to the teenage foster daughter of Lucy's friends who had begun spending weekends at the Kingsley home, a mentoring arrangement that had evolved naturally from Lucy's connections to the community centre in Melbourne. She is, Lucy confirmed, and she's bringing her science project to show you. Something about volcanoes, I believe. The mention of volcanoes triggered an explosion of questions from the twins, their curiosity insatiable as always. Lucy answered what she could, redirecting the more complex inquiries to resources they could explore together later. This approach, treating their questions as opportunities rather than interruptions, had become second nature to her, and to James as well, who had discovered an unexpected enjoyment in his sons. Intellectual development. From the terrace, James watched the scene with contentment. The sight of Lucy with his sons still struck him with occasional disbelief, that this extraordinary woman had chosen to remain with them, that she had helped rebuild what had seemed irreparably broken after Claire's death. Their relationship had developed with deliberate slowness over the past months. Weekly, dinner dates had evolved into comfortable intimacy, each step taken with careful consideration of the twins and the delicate balance they were all navigating. James had been surprised to discover that moving forward didn't require leaving Claire behind, that his heart, once reopened, had capacity for both honoring her memory and embracing a new future. Lucy glanced up, catching his eye, and smiled, that warm, genuine smile that had first begun to crack the walls around his grief-frozen heart. She whispered something to the twins, who immediately looked up and waved enthusiastically. "Dad, come see our carrots," Oliver called. "We grew them all by ourselves. Well, Lucy helped a little." "Just supervision," Lucy clarified as James joined them in the garden. "These farmers did all the real work." James crouched down, examining the harvest with appropriate seriousness. "Impressive crop, gentlemen. I believe this calls for a celebration." "Ice cream?" Oscar suggested hopefully. "Perhaps after dinner," James laughed. "Speaking of which, we should probably start preparing if Belle will be joining us." As they gathered their gardening tools and harvest, the domestic harmony of the moment struck Lucy with its ordinariness and its extraordinariness. What had begun as a temporary professional arrangement had evolved into something none of them could have anticipated. A family reconfigured by loss, but reconstructed through patience, understanding and love. Later that evening, after a lively dinner where Belle had captivated the twins with tales of her school science fair and demonstrations of her volcano project, Lucy and James sat on the terrace, watching the harbour lights shimmer against the darkening sky. "I had a call from Eleanor today," James mentioned, his hand resting comfortably over Lucy's. "She and Richard want to come for the twins' birthday next month." "That's wonderful," Lucy replied. "The boys will be thrilled." "She also asked about you," James continued, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Wanted to know if I had sorted things out properly yet, or if I was still dithering around like a typical emotionally stunted man." Lucy laughed. "She certainly doesn't mince words." "A family trait," James observed dryly. Claire was exactly the same. "What did you tell her?" James turned to face her, his expression softening. "I told her that some things can't be rushed, that we're finding our way together day by day." He paused. "And that I'm happier than I've been in a very long time." Lucy leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "Me too. I've been thinking," James said after a moment, his tone shifting to something more deliberate, "about the future, our future." Lucy felt her heart quicken slightly. "Oh? The lease on your apartment in Melbourne expires next month," he continued. "You mentioned you weren't sure whether to renew it." "I've been putting off the decision," Lucy admitted. "It seems silly to maintain a place I visit so rarely now." James nodded. "Which is why I wondered if you'd consider making your arrangement here more permanent." Lucy sat up, turning to face him fully. "James, are you asking me to move in officially?" "I'm asking for more than that," he said quietly, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small velvet box. "I'm asking if you'd consider becoming a permanent part of this family, not just as the twins' caregiver, but as my partner, my wife." He opened the box, revealing a ring that caught the soft terrace lighting. Not a traditional diamond, but a delicate emerald surrounded by smaller stones, the setting vintage and distinctive. "It was my grandmother's," James explained. "Claire had her own ring, which is saved for the boys when they're older. This one felt right for you. Different, but equally precious." Lucy's eyes filled with tears as she looked from the ring to James's face, seeing there a certainty that had been absent for so long. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "The boys already consider you family," James finished for her. "In fact, they've been dropping rather unsubtle hints about when I was going to make it official for weeks now." His expression grew more serious. "Lucy, I know this isn't conventional. I know there will be people who think it's too soon, or that I'm trying to replace Claire. But what I've learned, what you've helped me understand, is that the heart isn't so limited. Love doesn't divide, it multiplies." Lucy touched the ring gently, emotions overwhelming her ability to speak for a moment. "Claire will always be part of your story," she said finally. "Part of the boys' story, as she should be." "Yes," James agreed simply. "And you're not a replacement or a substitute. You're you. The woman who brought light back into our home when we needed it most. The woman I've fallen in love with, not despite our complicated beginnings, but because of the strength and compassion you showed throughout them." Lucy took a deep breath, her decision as clear as it had been the day she declined the Melbourne position. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." As James slipped the ring onto her finger, the rightness of the moment settled around them. Not an ending, but a continuation of the healing journey they had begun months ago when Lucy first crossed the threshold of the Kingsley home. The following morning, they gathered the twins in the sunroom, where sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the memory garden that had been their first step toward healing. "We have something important to talk with you about," James began, his arm around Lucy's shoulders. The boys exchanged knowing glances, their twin connection as strong as ever. "Is Lucy going to be our new mum?" Oliver asked directly. James and Lucy exchanged surprised looks. "Well," James said carefully, "Lucy and I would like to get married. She would become your stepmother." But I would never try to replace your mum," Lucy added quickly. "Your mother will always be your mother, and she'll always have a special place in your hearts and in this family." Oscar considered this solemnly. "Like how my memory garden has room for lots of special things, but each one has its own spot." Lucy felt her heart swell with love for this thoughtful, perceptive child. "Exactly. Like that, sweetheart. So you'll stay forever?" Oliver pressed, needing the reassurance. "That's the plan," Lucy confirmed. "If that's okay with you two?" The twins exchanged another of their silent communications before Oliver spoke for both of them. "It's okay, we already decided a long time ago that you belong with us." "When did you decide that?" James asked, amused by their certainty. "The first night," Oscar said simply, "when Lucy showed us her treasure box. Nobody else ever thought we were special enough for secrets before." Later that day, as the family walked along the beach, the twins running ahead to chase waves while James and Lucy followed hand in hand, Lucy reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a professional challenge, taming the unruly twins no nanny could handle, had evolved into something far more profound. The rebuilding of a family fractured by loss. The discovery that healing came not from forgetting the past, but from incorporating it into a new future. As she watched James join his sons at the water's edge, his formal reserve completely abandoned as he helped them construct an elaborate sand castle, Lucy felt gratitude wash over her for the unexpected turns life sometimes took, for second chances and new beginnings, for the family she had found when she wasn't looking, and for Claire, the woman she had never met, but whose legacy of love had shaped the three people Lucy now called her own. In the memory corner at home, Claire's photos would remain, her story integrated into the family's continuing narrative. Not an ending, Lucy thought as she joined her soon-to-be husband and stepsons by the water, but a new chapter, written with respect for what came before and hope for all that lay ahead. What had begun with a simple act of kindness had indeed unraveled a story filled with secrets, transformation, and second chances. And what Lucy had brought into the Kingsley mansion wasn't just peace, it was the kind of healing money could never buy.